Adding more than $200 billion for the war with Iran is not just a number, it is a warning. When the Pentagon put forward this massive budget proposal, the entire world could not help but be stunned. Is this a genuine military necessity or a sign of a confrontation being dragged out beyond expectations? Many analyses suggest that this sum is no longer merely operational costs, but reflects a shift from the expectation of a quick strike, quick victory, to preparing for a scenario far more lingering than President Trump's initial calculations. Conversely, many skeptical voices argue that continuously pumping more money into the Middle Eastern battlefield could be a manifestation of a strategic stalemate. When decisive results have yet to be achieved, expanding a budget is often not a sign of strength, but a sign that initial calculations failed to foresee the resilience of the adversary. Iran, with its dispersed defensive structure and flexible response capabilities, does not seem to be a target that can be subdued with short-term strikes. Therefore, the issue is no longer about how much the US will have to spend, but what it is spending for and for how long. If the budget continues to swell while the ultimate outcome of what the US will gain from the war remains murky, is this a noose tightening around the neck of the American economy? First, returning to the main point, what is $200 billion? It is an expenditure nearly equivalent to the total amount the US Congress approved for the war in Ukraine, a prolonged, attritional conflict of extreme geostrategic complexity. When a campaign still in its early stages demands resources nearly on that scale, analysts have reason to suspect that this is no longer a quick strike, early-end operation. On the contrary, it bears all the hallmarks of a war capable of dragging on, potentially exceeding the initial scenarios envisioned by the Donald Trump administration. Furthermore, when placed in correlation with recent military campaigns, the $200 billion mark represents a significant leap. Costs are no longer increasing linearly, but are expanding exponentially. This typically only happens when a campaign is forced to adjust its objectives, expand its scope, or face an opponent more complex than anticipated. In other words, the budget here is not just an accounting figure, it is the clearest indicator of how the war is swelling on the ground. And when the budget becomes an indicator, it simultaneously raises an unavoidable question: is Washington controlling the war, or is the war dragging Washington further than originally intended? But money, no matter how vast, is not yet the sole deciding factor. A modern war cannot be separated from the element of allies, and this is precisely where this campaign reveals many concerning issues. Unlike the 2003 Iraq War under George W. Bush, where the US spent months building an international coalition, this time Washington is acting almost unilaterally. The absence of a broad alliance is not just a matter of formality, but a genuine strategic void. In Europe, the dominant reaction is skepticism. Traditional allies are not entirely convinced by the argument that Iran is a direct threat to the extent that large-scale military action is required. At the same time, they must weigh the economic consequences, especially energy prices, a factor that could directly impact their own internal politics. In Asia, the indifference carries a different tone. Allies like Japan or South Korea are not only unenthusiastic, but are also directly affected by fluctuations in the oil market and supply chains. When interests are threatened, even symbolic support becomes fragile. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, the region that should be the front line, nations are showing caution. They may not support Iran, but they also do not want to be sucked into a war that risks paralyzing the world's most vital energy transit route. All these reactions, when placed together, create a fairly clear picture. The US is becoming increasingly lonely in the very war it initiated, and this leads to a greater consequence. When the America First slogan is pushed to its breaking point, it risks eroding the very foundation that has helped the US maintain its superpower status for decades, its network of allies. A superpower may be militarily strong, but without international backing, that power will be significantly limited in shaping the global order. From there, a pivotal question arises. Is the US still the world leader, or is it gradually becoming a lone player with vast resources but lacking consensus? Beyond all calculations of money, allies, or geopolitics, there remains a core issue that any war must face: legitimacy. And on this point, the campaign targeting Iran is revealing many controversies from its earliest days. From Tehran's side, the stance is very clear. This is an illegal attack, violating sovereignty and international law. This labeling is not just propaganda. It is an effort to shape how the world perceives the war. Meanwhile, the US frames the issue under the lens of security and deterrence, arguing that military action is necessary to neutralize threats. These two completely opposing interpretations show that the war is taking place not only on the ground, but also on the front of media and global perception. Even within the United States, consensus is not truly clear. Congress remains divided over the scale and objectives of the campaign, especially when the figure of over $200 billion was presented. Some lawmakers support a hardline stance, but many others worry that Washington is being pulled into a conflict without a clearly defined endgame. At the public level, support is not yet strong enough to form a solid political home front, a factor that played a crucial role in previous wars. This lack of consensus leads many to recall the lesson of Iraq in 2003. Back then, the US still achieved a swift military victory, but became bogged down in a prolonged war with enormous costs and complex consequences. Similarly, in Afghanistan, Washington achieved its initial goals, but ultimately had to withdraw after 2 decades amid many controversies over strategic effectiveness. Those precedents show a reality. Victory on the battlefield does not equate to political victory or long-term strategic success. In that context, the question is not only how far the US can go, but how long they can go when consensus is not guaranteed. A war lacking broad support, both domestically and internationally, is often very difficult to end in the way the initiator desires. It easily falls into a state of attrition and becomes increasingly hard to control. Looking back at the whole picture, the $200 billion figure seems to carry a different meaning. It is not just a military cost, but also a pressure on the American economy, from public debt to domestic priorities. Every dollar spent on war means trade-offs at home, from social welfare to development investment. Parallel to that, the war is being retold in very different ways. Washington emphasizes security and defense, while Tehran describes it as an act of aggression. The confrontation is thus not just about bombs and bullets, but a war of narratives. Whoever controls how the world understands the war will have the long-term advantage. But at the current moment, one thing has become clear: more than $200 billion is not just money. It is the price Washington is willing to pay for a strategy that increasingly looks solitary, and it is also a major test for the limits of their own power in a rapidly changing world. While Washington faces challenges regarding its budget and allies, the rest of the world is adjusting its strategies in very different ways. For Russia, this war brings a significant opportunity. Rising oil prices help Moscow improve its revenue, while the US distraction reduces pressure on the Ukrainian front. This is a classic example of how, in geopolitics, a conflict can create indirect benefits for parties not directly involved in the fighting. China, on the other hand, has a more cautious but no less calculated approach. Beijing may suffer some negative impacts from economic volatility, but at the same time, it is closely observing the rifts between the US and its allies. In the long run, the decline of Washington's prestige could open up a larger strategic space for China on the international stage. In the Middle East, the greatest risk lies in the Strait of Hormuz, the world's vital energy lifeline. Just one serious disruption could send the global oil market into a state of crisis. And when that happens, the war is no longer just a story between the US and Iran, but becomes a shock spreading across the entire global economy. Therefore, what is happening is not merely a bilateral confrontation. It is a link in the process of restructuring the world order, where powers adjust their positions, alliances are tested, and power vacuums begin to appear. From this perspective, $200 billion is not just the cost of a war. It is an investment or a risk for a major period of global geopolitical movement. And like any large investment, the most important question is not the amount of money spent, but whether it brings the expected results or merely opens a chain of consequences that even those involved cannot fully control.